Hello and welcome to another episode in season 2 of A Conversation with Carl. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe for the latest content. Today, I am very excited to welcome author and American historian Deborah Dwork. Deborah specializes in the history of the Holocaust. She is the founding director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Her most recent book, Saints and Liars, The Story of Americans Who Saved Refugees from the Nazis, has been selected by the Library Journal as the best book of 2025 and is a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award in Nonfiction.
I'm delighted to be here, Carl.
Thanks so much. So, what was the catalyst and the inspiration for writing this book?
Researching my first book on the history of the Holocaust, a book called Children with a Star, I found myself in the Quaker archives in Philadelphia. And these were the days before digitized holdings. So the archivist would bring a box and the researcher opened the box with great anticipation and celebration. And as I was going through these boxes, I came across a photograph of a young woman in her mid-20s, an American, holding a Jewish child in her arms. Date 1942, Marseille, France. And I said to the woman in the photograph, "Who are you? And why would you leave the safety of the United States to go to help someone who was at risk from the Nazis? And of all the thousands of desperate people, whom did you try to save?" Those questions were beyond the scope of the book I was writing then. So 25 years later, and 6 books later, I returned to those questions and to that woman.
So, you write in the book that luck, unpredictability, irrationality, the kindness of strangers, and human nature played a significant role in how people were saved and in our present lives. And I would say that, that we know these occurrences exist, but you say we do not necessarily use them to analyze history. And you went back and you used this. So can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I recorded the oral histories of then adult, previously children. Now most of them have died. Anyway, I recorded the oral histories of these child survivors of the Holocaust. And in nearly every case, they mentioned luck, good luck, and bad luck, unpredictable circumstances, luck, timing, fortuitous circumstance, and irrational motivations, whim. Anyway, the role of the irrational and the role of the unpredictable. Social historians, such as I, pay attention to and analyze the past using factors such as age, gender, degree of religious observance, social class, occupation. And yet these then adult child survivors kept talking to me about the unpredictable. And I heard them, but I didn't listen. I thought to myself, you're talking about timing, about luck, about unpredictable, but really it has to do with other factors. It took me a quarter of a century before I finally actually listened to them and realized that while Nazi policy, practice, and ideology framed the whole situation they were in, often in terms of what actually happened on the ground at a particular moment, had to do with the unpredictable or the irrational.
Yeah. So I will say, about last summer, I was on the train at West 4th Street, and a man got on and he demanded at that moment to find the Zionists. And he started screaming really loud, "I need the Zionists." And he started saying, "And I'm going to kill them. They need to be eliminated." It was a very scary moment. When I was reading this book, and I was thinking to myself of that moment, if we were in another car, if we were in a different place on the train, we would have had a different ride home. And that moment was totally luck. It was bad luck. I related to that because I was thinking, wow, this is just the luck of life,
And we know how that it operates in our lives. We know also how the irrational
Yeah.
operates in our lives. Have you, Carl,
Yeah.
ever had an affectionate relationship with another human being?
Yes, of course.
So yes, and did
Yes.
this person end up as a partner for some time?
Yes. Yeah.
So when you met this person, did
Yes.
you have a clipboard and a checklist?
I didn't have a checklist and a clipboard, no, but in my head you have it, but not like you don't have it out there in front of you. Yes. Yeah.
And so it was an irrational response. It was an
Yeah.
emotional response. And this was an incredibly important choice in your life.
Yeah.
Partners are an incredibly
Yeah.
important choice. So my
Yeah.
point is, we know this to be true, that the unpredictable and the irrational shape our lives. We know
Yeah.
it. But when we think about history, we use a different lens and we flatten the past. Instead of it being three-dimensional and multicolor, it's two-dimensional and flat.
Well, especially when like you write about I get the names all wrong here, but you write about Martha in Czechoslovakia. They are looking for adventure. And they're looking, you start to think about like, why did you save life? Because I was thinking, why? She could have just been back in America and be brave and stay home. And she left her kids behind. She runs for Congress later. You write about it. But in the process, I was thinking, wow, she's got this calling and she's fighting this and she's going forward to do this. To me, the question goes back to who are these people that save lives?
They were principled, to be sure. They operated out of principle. And at the same time, it's not a but, it's an and. And at the same time, they had a taste for adventure. So Martha, you just mentioned Martha. Martha went with her husband, Waitstill, from Boston to Prague. Waitstill wanted her to go with him. But going with him meant that she left their 7-year-old son and their 2-year-old daughter behind in the United States. Off they went to Prague to provide relief and then ultimately to rescue people targeted by the Nazis and their allies. And that was contrary to social norms at the time. A mother stayed home with her children. So we have the hint that she wanted a life beyond the home. I think Waitstill also put it best for himself. He also operated out of principle, but he had a taste for adventure. And the way he put it was, Yankees like to skate on thin ice.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me too, because you really show the struggle with like Bickelman, and he's arguing where his place is in the JDC. And you really describe him like he's arguing with others about his status. And at the same time, he's saving lives, and who should they pick and who should they choose? I find that like, so you brought the human element out, which I thought was fascinating.
I think that's right. We look at these people as only saints, people who did larger than life people, who did larger than life activities. And holding that vision separates them from us. It gives us a pass to do nothing because we're not larger than life people. We're just ordinary people. But if you see them as they were, saints and liars, people who lied, they needed to lie in order to do these saintly things. And the distance between them and us decreases. And we can say, Beckelman, he was a kvetch. He complained about everything. He complained about the food he ate, about the hotel room, about his colleagues, about everything. And yet, those who have thought about Beckelman before actually called him the saintly Beckelman. Saintly? Not so.
Yeah. It's also fascinating to me when you write about Shanghai. They didn't care if you had a passport. They cared if you had $3. Why didn't more Jews go to Shanghai?
2 reasons.
Okay.
The first was that there weren't so many ships going to Shanghai, getting there, physically getting there. That's always a problem for refugees. Refugees now and refugees in the Nazi past. How do you actually get from point A to point B? What is the means of conveyance? And the berths for ships going to Shanghai were sold out for months and months in advance. So one of the reasons that people didn't go to Shanghai was because they couldn't get there. But another factor was that they couldn't imagine how they would live. They didn't speak Mandarin. The language, the food, the culture, the customs, all of those were completely unfamiliar to these Europeans who were vulnerable and looking for a place to go.
So, yeah, I know you describe 5 different scenarios in the book. Where was this happening all over Europe? Or is this something new that we're learning about? Or were there a lot of these organizations trying to save Jews? Are there many more stories we still have to uncover?
There are always stories to be uncovered, but I think the main patterns are now clear. And I would point out that Saints and Liars is about Americans who went abroad to help save. There are also many stories about people, Europeans, who sought to help their neighbors, people they knew, people they didn't know, but fellow country people, fellow countrymen, fellow countrywomen, co-citizens. And there are many stories of their bravery and efforts as well.
Why do you think these people chose to do this? Because if you had the chance of sitting there, like when I was reading about Beckelman, and I'm thinking to myself, he could be home and he doesn't feel safe. It's like, because he writes about one part, I'm scared, like when they take people off the ship, I think in Poland, he writes about like, I don't think I could be as brave as them. But meanwhile, he's still there and he's still in the situation.
So I think they went because they were principled and they really held fast to the ethic of helping, of saving, of being of service. For them, being of service was not just words, not just a phrase. It was a way of life. It was a pledge to life. And at the same time, there was that sense of adventure and a wish to make a mark on the world. So Laura Margolis can join American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee employee. Laura Margolis was sent by the New York headquarters to Shanghai to try to help the refugee community in Shanghai. And she, writing after the war, definitely after the war, in an oral history, she said, if I'd been a man, I would have joined the Navy to see the world. But I'm a woman, so I joined the JDC.
The other thing I found fascinating is, who do you save? And you see that with the Unitarians and the Quakers. There's an argument between the two of them, the two groups. One's trying to save the educated people, and then the others are saying, we'll save anyone.
Everyone, all groups face this question of whom to save. Because think about it, there are thousands, really hundreds of thousands of targeted people. And you have to figure out whom are you going to save. So the Quakers held the principle of saving anyone who was at risk, anyone who was vulnerable. That was their principled position. But that's not how life was lived on the ground. As it turned out, the woman who had the Jewish child in her arms, Marjorie McClelland, a great favorite of mine, Marjorie McClelland found herself attracted to the cute children, the ones who were not so very high-spirited, those who were more malleable, more obedient. And she chose them. And she was a Quaker. So Marjorie McClelland held the principle of helping those who most needed help. But as life was lived on the ground, she chose the children whom she found most attractive.
So, yeah. Sorry, go
The
on.
Unitarians, by contrast, were very clear that they were going to help those who would be instrumental in reestablishing democratic governments after the Nazis fell. So they chose the artists and the jurists and the scientists and the musicians who would re-establish democratic norms after the war was over. And they were very clear, though that was their target group. You mentioned, Carl, you mentioned the Unitarians and the Quakers and their different philosophies. But let me tell you, the Jews had their arguments as well as to whom should be saved. Should it be those who were most Orthodox because they would bring Jewish Orthodox traditions to the United States? Should it be children? Should it be working people? Everyone had a group that they felt was most in need.
And then you go back to the original question that we were talking about, the luck. It's just lucky that all of a sudden you have someone now that thinks you're cute, that thinks you're an artist that could look to the future, and you're just where you are at that moment. You're just the lucky person.
Yes. So we talk about the luck. There are those who have bad luck. For example, the university student who was helping Martha and Waitstill in Prague. And the British, he did have papers to go to Britain, but his middle initial was incorrectly recorded. And because of that, the British turned down his otherwise completely legitimate papers.
Yeah. And you're right. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, so Mr. Vellers ended up being murdered rather than saved because of that one initial.
Yeah. And you write about the green ink that they find on the ship. And that's the same thing too. It's luck that she finds the green ink to write the papers, to get the papers down correctly.
Yes. So Miss Bull, the British Quaker secretary, was writing a list of the people who were on the manifest to go from Prague to Britain. And she used a pen filled with green ink, borrowed from a physician who was standing next to her. Martha was in charge of that cohort. And there were two men who were not registered. So she had to find that physician with the pen with green ink and fill in write their names quickly on the list. But if it weren't for that green ink, that special green ink, the Dutch border guard would not have been persuaded to allow the men to enter.
She writes it on the other side of the page, which
Yes.
I found was brilliant. The guard is questioning, where was it there before? And she says, yes. That takes bravery.
Bravery and quick thinking.
Yes.
That she would think to herself, I have to write their names in the same green ink, rather than just saying the pen ran out of ink.
Yeah.
And so we used blue ink.
Yeah.
But no.
She finds the same ink. Where do you think we are today? I mean, like, you study the Holocaust, and we hear a lot about it today. Anti-Semitism's on the rise in the U.S., worldwide. Where are we today?
We are in a time of increasing anti-Semitism, and we are also at a time of refugee crisis. We are in as great a refugee crisis now as we saw during the Nazi era. And one of the things I would hope that Saints and Liars would do, one of the things, is to make the targeted group, the vulnerable, those who are at risk, to fill out the human contours. So reading about the past, we understand how it is that refugees are on the run. They don't have their papers in order. They can't have their papers in order because in order to escape danger, they need to get out of town. And the same thing with the people we call coyotes today, and were called during the Nazi era smugglers. They used the term smugglers, smuggling human beings across the border. I would hope that reading about the past would give us greater appreciation for the humanity of those involved. those affected.
So, what is your hope after reading the book that we do today differently?
My hope is that we would step forward, step up, and step out. I don't see the past as a lesson. I don't think that history is one long lesson for us to learn. But I do see history as an invitation to join another conversation. And for me, writing Saints and Liars turned out to be an invitation to get off the couch.
What I find is that it was so human. You wrote about people's jealousy, people's fears, people, and you put that human context into the story so that you get to see that as you're looking through as you're looking at this, you get to see people for who people are the same 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 2000, we're all the same. And I think a lot of us just want to be seen and want to be heard and want to see how do we make our mark.
I agree. And I hope that Saints and Liars can help us start that journey.
So, as we start to wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I appreciate these wonderful questions. I appreciate your engagement with the subject, and I appreciate your enthusiasm for the book.
No, I think the book is really it's fascinating, and I thought about as I was reading it. I took a Holocaust class when I was in college, and one of the things that I remember the professor saying was that the Holocaust is 6 million different stories, and you still see it today. Like every time you read it, there's still something to learn about this because I think every story was different and every person had a different story that they went through. And it wasn't like you were there, you went to Auschwitz, you went you went to the work camp. People have these fascinating stories about how they survived. And it's, as you said, it's irrationality, it's kindness, it's unpredictability, it's all of it combined. And that I think is the human experience.
Would you agree with me when I say that I feel the same way about refugees today? That it's not just one story, it's thousands,
Of stories,
hundreds of
correct.
thousands of individual stories.
Yes. And it's people trying to figure out how to get here, how to stay safe,
Yes.
how to live the life that they want. I think that I think is when she said struck a chord when I forget her name, but when she says she would have joined the
Laura
Navy.
Margolis.
Lauren Margolis, where she said I would have joined the Navy, but no, she's not going to join the Navy. She's going to join the joint so that she can see the world. And I think it just shows you that people want to experience that and and I do think people want to help. I think the bottom line is of all of us, well, not all of us, I would say the majority of us want to help each other. Yeah.
I agree. And I think also that more people would do more if only they saw if only they saw what to do.
Yes. There's what to do. The book is Saints and Liars, Deborah Dwork. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you out there for listening. And as always, let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comment section. Until next time, everyone, be safe.